The abandoned asylum. In a remote part of the countryside, there stood an old asylum, abandoned for decades. The locals believed it was haunted by the spirits of patients who had perished there under mysterious circumstances. The asylum, originally built in the late 1800s, was a place where the mentally ill were sent away, often forgotten by their families. Over the years, it gained a notorious reputation for its harsh treatments and inhumane conditions. One stormy night, a group of friends decided to explore the asylum. There was Sarah, the curious leader, Tom, the skeptic, Emily, the easily frightened, Jake, the brave one, and Lisa, the documentarian, with her camera always ready. They had heard the stories and wanted to experience the thrill themselves. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and a spirit box, they made their way to the asylum. As they pushed open the heavy door, it creaked loudly, echoing through the empty halls. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay. They switched on their flashlights, the beams cutting through the darkness, and began their exploration. The entrance hall was vast, with a crumbling staircase leading to the upper floors. Peeling wallpaper and broken furniture hinted at the asylum's former grandeur. As they ventured deeper into the asylum, the atmosphere grew colder. In one of the hallways, Jake Iggy, who was leading the group, stopped abruptly. "Did you see that?" he whispered. At the end of the corridor, a shadowy figure stood motionless. They all froze, their flashlights flickering. When they directed the light towards the figure, it vanished. A chill ran down their spines as they realized they were not alone. The group moved cautiously down the main hallway, their footsteps muffled by the thick dust on the floor. Suddenly, they heard a faint whisper, like a child's voice calling for help. They followed the sound to a door at the end of the corridor, slightly ajar. A pale light seeped through the gap, beckoning them to enter. Inside, they found an old children's ward, toys scattered around, as if the children had just left. Curiosity piqued, Lisa suggested they use the spirit box to try and communicate with the spirits. They sat in a circle in the middle of the room, the spirit box emitting static noises. Sarah turned it on and asked, "Is anyone here with us?" For a few moments, there was only static. Then a faint voice crackled through, saying, "Help, me." Emily's face went pale as the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Inside the room, they found the ghostly figure of a young girl, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. She clutched a worn-out teddy bear, her only comfort in the afterlife. The friends felt a chill run down their spines as the girl began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. She told them of the horrors she had witnessed, of the cruel experiments performed by the asylum's doctors. Her story was one of pain and suffering, a tale that made their hearts ache. As the ghostly girl vanished, Jake noticed an old diary on a decaying table. The cover was inscribed with the name Tsiwitsi, Dr. Harold Blackwood, the asylum's head doctor. They opened it to reveal detailed accounts of the experiments performed on the patients. The diary confirmed the ghost story and revealed even more sinister details about Dr. Blackwood's obsession with the supernatural and his attempts to trap spirits in the asylum. Terrified, the friends decided to leave the asylum. As they turned to exit, the ghostly figure of Dr. Blackwood appeared, his eyes filled with malice. He began to chase them through the halls, his footsteps echoing loudly. The group ran as fast as they could, their hearts pounding in their chests. The exit door was just within reach, light streaming through it. They burst through the door, the first light of dawn breaking the horizon. Behind them, the asylum fell silent once more, the spirits waiting for the next visitors. Outside, the friends collapsed on the grass, breathing heavily. The sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the eerie building. They looked back at the asylum, now silent and foreboding. Sarah turned to the group, her voice trembling. "We need to tell people about this. The spirits need to be freed." They nodded in agreement, vowing never to forget the horrors they had witnessed and the spirits they had encountered. The asylum might have been abandoned, but its ghosts were very much alive. The Shadows of the Further. The Johnson family had recently moved into their new home, an old Victorian house with creaky floors and drafty windows. One night, as everyone was asleep, young Liam began to stir in his bed. He had always been a light sleeper, prone to nightmares. But this time, something felt different. He awoke to find a dark, shadowy figure standing at the foot of his bed. Paralyzed with fear, he shut his eyes tightly, hoping it was just a bad dream. The next morning, Liam told his mother, Claire, about the shadow. She dismissed it as a nightmare, but noticed the unease in his eyes. To comfort him, she promised to leave the antique lamp on by his bedside. That night, Claire was awakened by the sound of whispers. She tiptoed to Liam's room and found him sitting up in bed, talking to someone unseen. The room was cold, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. Over the next few days, strange occurrences began to plague the Johnson household. Objects moved on their own. The rocking chair in the living room swayed back and forth without anyone touching it, and the chandelier would swing slightly, as if caught in a gentle breeze. Claire could no longer deny that something was wrong. She confided in her husband, Mark, who remained skeptical but agreed to investigate. Desperate for answers, Claire reached out to Elise, a renowned paranormal expert. Elise arrived with her team, including Specs and Tucker, who carried various equipment. She had a calm demeanor and piercing eyes that seemed to see right through the house's facade. She walked it through the rooms. She paused, feeling the presence of something dark and malevolent. She confirmed Claire's worst fears. Their house was a gateway to the further, a realm where tormented souls lingered. Elise and her team set up cameras and sensors around the house, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. They gathered in the living room, where a monitor displayed ghostly outlines of figures moving in the shadows. As they watched, the temperature in the room dropped, and a cold breeze blew through, extinguishing the candles. Elise began to speak, her voice steady. "We are not alone. The spirits are restless." That night, they conducted a seance to communicate with the spirits. They sat around a table, hands joined, with candles flickering in the dim light. Elise closed her eyes and began to channel the spirits. The air grew thick with tension as a deep guttural voice spoke through her, revealing the presence of a malevolent entity known as the Bride in Black. This entity had latched on to Liam, using him as a conduit to enter the living world. Determined to save their son, Mark decided to enter the further, guided by Elise. He lay on the couch as Elise performed a hypnotic ritual to separate his spirit from his body. Mark awoke in a dark, misty realm filled with ghostly figures and eerie sounds. He called out for Liam, his voice echoing through the void. As he ventured deeper, he encountered spirits trapped in a perpetual state of torment, their eyes pleading for help. Mark finally found Liam in an old, decrepit house, cowering in a corner. Standing between them was the Bride in Black, a terrifying figure in a tattered wedding dress, with hollow eyes and a sinister grin. Mark mustered all his courage and confronted the entity, demanding it release his son. The Bride in Black screeched, its voice echoing through the further, and lunged at Mark. A fierce struggle ensued, with Mark using every ounce of his willpower to protect Liam. With Liam in his arms, Mark ran through the misty realm, chased by ghostly figures. He could see a bright light in the distance, the gateway back to the living world. As they approached the light, the spirits clawed at them, trying to pull them back into the darkness. With a final burst of strength, Mark leaped into the light, holding Liam tightly. They awoke in the living room, gasping for breath, the connection to the further severed. Back in the living world, the Johnson family sat together in their living room, the sun shining through the windows, bringing a sense of peace and warmth. The house felt different, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. Elise assured them that the gateway to the further had been closed, and the spirits would no longer be able to harm them. Though they knew their lives would never be the same, they were grateful to have each other, and to have survived the horrors of the further. The Cabin of Dread. In the depths of a dense forest, an isolated cabin stood, weathered by time and nature. 5 friends, Emily, Jake, Lisa, Mark, and Sarah, decided to spend a weekend there, eager to escape the hustle and bustle of city life. They had heard rumors about the cabin's dark history, but dismissed them as mere folklore. As they approached the cabin, the setting sun cast long shadows, and the forest grew eerily silent. On their first night, after a few drinks and laughs, they decided to explore the cabin. Emily found a trap door leading to a basement. Curiosity got the better of them, and they descended into the dark, dusty space. The basement was cluttered with old relics, strange artifacts, and eerie, ancient books. As they rummaged through the items, Lisa picked up an old diary bound in leather, while Mark found a peculiar puzzle box. Lisa, intrigued by the diary, began to read aloud. The pages detailed the gruesome history of the cabin, recounting rituals and sacrifices to appease ancient gods. Meanwhile, Mark toyed with the puzzle box, inadvertently triggering a mechanism. A faint, ominous light emanated from the box, and the air grew heavy with a sense of dread. Suddenly, the cabin trembled, and the friends heard whispers echoing through the walls. Outside, dark, shadowy figures began to emerge from the forest, their glowing eyes fixed on the cabin. The friends, now thoroughly frightened, watched in horror from the windows. The figures moved closer, and the cabin seemed to come alive with malevolent energy. The air was filled with a sinister presence, and they realized they had unleashed something far beyond their understanding. Desperate to survive, the friends barricaded the doors and windows, trying to keep the entities out. The shadowy figures clawed at the walls, their whispers growing louder and more menacing. The cabin shook violently, as if trying to expel its unwanted guests. Emily found an old shotgun and handed it to Jake, who stood ready to defend them. They knew they were trapped and had to find a way to end the terror they had unleashed. In their frantic search for a solution, Sarah discovered a hidden door in the basement concealed behind a stack of old crates. The door led to an ancient chamber, filled with ritualistic symbols and a large, ominous altar. The walls were adorned with carvings depicting horrific scenes of sacrifices and dark rituals. At the center of the altar lay a ceremonial dagger, its blade stained with dried blood. Emily, understanding that they needed to perform a ritual to banish the entities, took the ceremonial dagger in her hand. She stood at the altar, her heart pounding. The ancient symbols began to glow faintly, and the shadowy figures closed in, their whispers now a deafening chorus. With a trembling voice, she recited the incantation from the diary, hoping to reverse the curse. The shadowy figures burst into the chamber, and a fierce confrontation ensued. The air crackled with dark energy as the friends fought to keep the entities at bay. Jake fired the shotgun, the blasts echoing through the chamber, while Mark and Sarah wielded makeshift weapons. Emily continued the ritual, her voice growing stronger, with each word fueled by determination to save her friends. As Emily reached the climax of the ritual, a blinding light enveloped the chamber. The shadowy figures screamed in anguish, their forms disintegrating into nothingness. The ground trembled violently, and the oppressive darkness lifted, replaced by an eerie silence. The friends collapsed in exhaustion, the weight of their ordeal finally lifting from their shoulders. The next morning, the friends emerged from the cabin, battered but alive. They sat together on the steps, watching the early morning light filter through the trees. The forest seemed peaceful once more, the sinister presence gone. They knew they had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. As they prepared to leave, they vowed never to speak of the horrors they had faced, carrying the memory of that fateful night with them forever. Prepare yourself for haunting stories, terrifying legends, and the unknown that lurks in the dark. Subscribe to Horror Stories to fall asleep now, and join our community of horror enthusiasts. Hit the bell icon to never miss a new fright. Remember, in the world of horror stories to fall asleep, fear is just the beginning.